Mr. Speaker, this morning the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1033, providing for consideration of H.R. 3807, the Relief for Restaurants and Other Hard-Hit Small Businesses Act of 2022, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Small Business, self-executes a manager's amendment from Chairwoman Velasquez, and provides one motion to recommit. And Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to adopt the rule and support critical funding for restaurants and other small businesses across our nation. As we all know, small businesses, especially restaurants, are the backbone of our local economies, not only for the revenue they bring in, but for the many local workers they employ, families that need their paycheck now more than ever. But sadly, restaurants have been some of the hardest hit businesses throughout the COVID-19 crisis, and many have struggled to keep their doors open. Many of us here have made a promise to support workers, families, and businesses in their time of need, and that's why we established the Restaurant Revitalization Fund in the American Rescue Plan, which provided $28.6 billion in emergency assistance to eligible restaurants, bars, and qualifying businesses impacted by the COVID crisis. This program was clearly a success, providing relief to more than 100,000 restaurants and food and beverage businesses across the nation. Some recent estimates show that the program saved over 900,000 jobs, and 96% of recipients said the grant made it more likely they would stay in business. However, there is no question that our initial investment was not enough. The program ran out of funds in just 3 weeks, as the total funding requested exceeded $72 billion, far more than the $28.6 billion provided for in the American Rescue Plan. This funding gap resulted in 178,000 restaurants who were unable to secure funding in this program, even though they applied to the program and met all of the eligibility requirements. Let me say that again: 178,000 restaurants, many of which are in danger of permanent closure if Congress does not provide them with the relief they need. The underlying legislation, the Relief for Restaurants and Other Hard-Hit Business Act, would provide for $42 billion to replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, giving the Small Business Administration the funding necessary to close this funding gap and process the applications of those entities who are deemed eligible in the initial application period, providing a lifeline for the restaurant industry that has faced so many challenges over the past 2 years. In addition to this critical funding, the underlying legislation also provides $13 billion for a new Hard-Hit Industries Award program, which will grant much-needed relief to other small businesses across industries and sectors that were the hardest hit by the pandemic, but were not eligible for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund or Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. This new program would prioritize those eligible small businesses that experienced the heaviest pandemic-related losses, beginning with those that lost 80% of their revenue. To pay for both the establishment of the new program and the replenishment of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, this bill would use funds unclaimed, reclaimed, seized, or returned to the federal government from bad actors attempting to defraud previous recovery programs. Back in October 2020, the Small Business Administration Office of the Inspector General had already identified $78 billion in potentially fraudulent loans and grants to ineligible entities, and more than 300 individuals have been brought to justice. This legislation also increases oversight and audit requirements, ensuring that this additional support goes to the businesses originally intended to receive assistance. Mr. Speaker, I have always been an advocate of additional support for the restaurant and hospitality industry, and many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have demonstrated support for the Restaurant Revitalization Fund as well. I hope we continue to see this bipartisan support for this effort on the House floor. I urge all of my colleagues to support the rule and the underlying legislation to deliver critical funding for restaurants and small businesses and communities across the country. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.